Okay, we're live. The repeal of Obamacare under the Republicans Act is the official title of the program is, let's see here, the Obamacare Repeal Reconciliation Act of 2017. But nonetheless, it has been scored by the CBC, that's Congressional Budget Office, and we now have those facts which we'll give to you in a minute. This is a special presentation from WBRN Radio in Boston and on the Boston Red Network. Nonetheless, it is on the Spreaker iHeart concession here. What we're doing is more original programming, although this will be a short presentation on this particular platform. And then on other platforms, we'll come from Blog Talk onto a myriad of other platforms. Now, we are going to start to modify this. The simple reason is this particular platform has been designated as one of the better platforms by one of the internet slash podcasting gurus that has had a long experience with these particular podcasts. Daniel, let me get it right in a minute. Daniel J. Lewis of the Audacity to Podcast. You can check out Mr. Lewis, and he has a lot of advice for anyone that's wanting to get into internet radio and are into podcasting. We'll try to put a link to his site when we finish up here. Time constraints being what they are. But nonetheless, this is some of the things that we are up to move to a vast audience here, a different audience. I've noted, looking at some of the statistics, that we're becoming more and more of a mobile listening audience. That would be through the outlets like Streaka. Streaka has always been a very strong outlet for us here, and many of the other mobile outlets. We're going to start paying more attention to that. A mobile app is coming. It's sort of shameful being an Android developer. We haven't got the mobile app finished, but we'll get that done here. So let me just go to this particular to the PDF here. This is the Congressional Budget Office's cost summary. Congressional Budget Office and staff of the Joint Committee on Taxation has completed an estimate of the direct spending and revenue effects of the Obamacare Repeal and Reconciliation Act. Now, this is the latest brainchild of the Republicans under their leadership of McConnell, and DJ Trump has been pushing it to just simply repeal the act and not replace it with anything. That would come later. But nonetheless, an amendment in the nature of a substitute to this is H.R. 1628, which would repeal many of the provisions of the Affordable Care Act. According to the agency's analysis, enacting legislation would decrease the deficit by $473 billion. That is over a period from 2017 to 2026. The CBC estimates that the number of people who are uninsured would increase by 17 million in 2018. That would be next year, compared with the number under current law. The number would increase to 27 million in 2020. That would be 2 years off after the elimination of the Affordable Care Act or expansion eligibility for Medicaid. The elimination of subsidies for the insurance purchased through the marketplace or the exchange established by the ACA or Obamacare would then to 32 million by 2026. It's about 9 years out there. The average premium in the non-group market for individual policies purchased through the marketplace or directly from insurers would increase by roughly 25% relative to projections that's on the current law. In 2018, the increase would reach about 50% in 2020. That's 2 years off, and would double in 2026. The CBC and JT, the Joint Committee, estimates on the legislation about half the nation's population would live in areas having no insurer participating in a non-group marketplace in 2020 because of downward pressure on enrollment and upward pressure on premiums. The share would continue to increase, extending to about 3/4 of the population by 2026. Not very good news out there. And let me just 1 second here get the rest of our PDF here. Okay. The way in which individuals, employers, states, and insurers, doctors, medical centers, and other affected parties would respond to the change made by the legislation are all difficult to predict, and so the estimates reported are uncertain, but the CBC has endeavored to develop a budgetary estimate that are in the middle of the distribution of potential outcomes. Pay-as-you-go procedures apply because enacting the legislation would affect direct spending and revenue. The CBC estimates that enacting legislation would not increase net direct spending or on-budget deficits in any of the four consecutive 10-year periods following 2027. CBC has not completed an estimate of the potential impacts of legislation on discretionary spending, which would be subject for future appropriation actions. The CBC has reviewed the legislation and determined that it would impose no intergovernment mandates as defined by the Unfunded Mandate Reform Act, exceeding the threshold established in the Act for private sector mandates. That would be $156 million in 2007. The largest budgetary effects of enacting legislation would stem from repealing of the optional expansion of eligibility for Medicaid established in the ACA, beginning in 20, repealing subsidies for health insurance coverage obtained through the marketplace in 2020. So in other words, this would all happen within 2 years, beginning upon enacting and eliminating penalties associated with requirements that people obtain health insurance coverage known as the individual mandates, and that large employers offer their employees medical insurance that covers what's called standard things known as the employer mandates, while keeping those requirements in place. Repealing of many of the provisions of Obamacare that increase federal tax revenues apart from the effects of the provisions related to insurance coverage, delaying of the federal excise tax imposed on some medical insurance plans with higher premiums. That would be in 2020. Upon enactment, other parts of the legislation that affect the budget would repeal reductions to state allotments for Medicaid payments to medical centers that treat disproportionate share of uninsured and low-income people, increasing the amount of funding authorized and appropriated to, now this is very important here, community health center funds, and for grants to state to address substance abuse. Prohibit federal funding from being made available for 1 year to certain entities that provide abortions, eliminating the prevention and public health funds beginning in 2019 terminating the enactment of federal matching rates for personal care services and support services on the Community First Choice Act, that's of 2020. Elimination to the federal estimated cost, to the federal government. Enacting the legislation would reduce the federal deficit by 473 billion. That's from 2017 to 2020 period. That change would result from 1,429 billion reduction in outlays, partially offset by 956 billion decrease in revenue. The basis of the estimate assumed that the legislation would be enacted by July 31st, 2017, which is sort of doubtful right now. The March 2016 baseline, the budgetary effects relative to, now that would be roughly 1 year past. Agencies have provided an overall estimate of budgetary effects of provisions that affect insurance coverage and not separate estimates for each provision. Let me dive on through this a little bit more here. The use of the March, we won't spend any time on it, the March 2016 baseline methodology for estimating the effect on insurance coverage. The legislation would change the pricing of non-group insurance, the eligibility for and the amount of subsidy to purchase that insurance, and the willingness of the uninsured to participate in non-group markets. It would also lend to changes in eligibility for Medicaid and spending for that program. The legislative effect on health insurance coverage would depend in part on how many individuals responded to the changes in prices after the subsidies they have to pay for non-group insurance. To capture these complexities, the CBC used a macro simulation model to estimate how the rates of coverage and sources of insurance would change as a result of alteration in eligibility and subsidies. Pretty much a standard method here, based upon survey data that the model incorporated a wide range of information about representative samples of individuals and families, including their incomes, employment, health status, health insurance coverage. The model also incorporated information from research literature about the responsiveness of individuals and employers to price changes and the responsiveness of individuals to changes in eligibility for public coverage. Budgetary effects, insurance coverage provisions, a reduction of 852 billion in federal outlays for Medicaid, most of which would have been spent to provide benefits for adults under 65 whose income is equal to or less than 138% of the poverty level. A reduction of 679 billion in subsidies for non-group health insurance. Additional savings, a total of 6 billion from repealing a tax for certain small businesses provide health insurance to their workers. These gross savings would be partially offset by revenue reductions and additional costs, a decline in revenue of 171 billion from eliminating penalties paid by employers, a reduction of revenue of 38 billion from eliminating penalties paid by uninsured people. That has been put incidentally on hold. A net increase in spending of 21 billion for Medicare program, stemming from changes in payments to hospitals that serve disproportionate shares of low-income people. So there are other types of effects here. The legislation would make two primary sets of changes that would affect insurance coverage and premiums. First, upon enactment, the legislation would eliminate penalties associated with requirements that most people obtain insurance. Second, beginning in 2020, the legislation would eliminate the ACA's expansion of Medicaid eligibility and subsidies available to people who purchase health care through a marketplace established by Obamacare. Estimate changes starting in 2018. Medicaid expansion subsidies through the marketplace were eliminated. The effects of legislation on insurance coverage and premiums would stem primarily from the repeal of penalties associated with the individual mandates. About 17 million more people would be uninsured under the legislation than in current law. That's in 2018 alone. On the current law, the penalties associated with individual mandates apply to some Medicaid eligible adults and children. For example, applies to single individuals with income above 90% of the level. In addition, some people applying for coverage in the marketplace because of the penalties and turn out to be eligible for Medicaid, and some who are not subject to penalties think they would be if they did not enroll in Medicaid. Under the current law, the prospects of paying the employer mandate penalty tips the scales for businesses and causes them to decide to offer health insurance, and some had not. There was a big argument about that, and some of these businesses are just now having coming under the mandate. The effects of insurance coverage, this is by CBC, enactment would increase the number of people without health insurance, 27 million in 2017, 32 million, you already heard that, without coverage in 6 years, 2026. So the effects on market stability, according to agency's analysis, the elimination of penalties associated with individual mandates and the subsidies for insurance would retain the marketplace regulations, would destabilize the non-insurance marketplace, non-group, excuse me. The effects would worsen over time. In other words, when you have a destabilization in the marketplace, you'll have destabilization all over the place. Increase in long-term direct spending and deficits would not increase directly in the 10-year period. Now, these are estimates and very conservative estimates at that. In June 17th of this year, the analysis of previous amendment nature to substitute it to the Act, the agency estimated that enacting the amendment would reduce the deficit by $321 billion over 10 years. But in other words, things have changed here and are continuing to change. Won't get into this. I'll just simply pin this to the presentation. But you can see now that the effects of this are in itself very, very draconian and will have financial effects beyond in 2026. So we're talking 6-7 years there, but things can, as they say, accelerate. And as we look more and more, we can see the chance of more and more acceleration. This is a reason the American Medical Association, the insurance lobby themselves, have came out against the previous act that collapsed. There's so many collapsing acts around here, and no doubt they will come out against this particular act because of the problems that it is causing in its preliminary stage. Now, will this be adopted? It's sort of doubtful because at this present rate, as far as for an absolute repeal, there's less than 40 votes in the Senate at this time. So we don't know how many are there. We'll wrap this up, but we'll go to the Washington Post period. Incidentally, our thoughts go out to Senator John McCain. He's been diagnosed with a brain tumor, and the headline here, with brain cancer sends a jolt through Congress. No doubt about it. And they had delayed the vote originally because he was suffering from a clot on the eye and to be out of there. But now that these things are happening, there is more turmoil there. And there was a meeting at the White House with DJ Bush, and he had the 52 senators in and cajoling them, but that doesn't really matter. Okay, he had 29, and obviously Senator McCain couldn't make it. But for some of the senators, there were veiled threats he would campaign against them. But part of the problem here is with the new CBC score out here, we'll call it, there's even more problems. His latest stage disconnect between the president and the Senate. It came days after he tweeted, "Let Obamacare fail," and 2 days after he called for a repeal-only bill. Well, the repeal-only bill has very, very little support. The other fixes have very, very little support. Um, I know it seems like, this is John Cornyn, we've got a list of a bit of whiplash, but I think we're making progress. But even he has no clarity on the next step we are still discussing. Well, the problem here is the more discussions they have, the less it is out here from Lamar Alexander. He's from Tennessee. He said there's still not a vote for repeal, only a bill from the so-called House Freedom Caucus. Uh, Bringing the process means to sidestep GOP leaders reluctant to expose vulnerable members politically there. The House has its own version of the Affordable Care Act. It doesn't really matter now. The American people do not know why we have not done something on the desk. As Mark Meadows, he's of this conservative caucus. Here we are on and nothing to show for it. Well, no doubt. From Ron Johnson, he is from Wisconsin, who has expressed opposition to various times to the act. Said he understands that Trump's push for repeal and replacement at lunch as a call to return to a broader bill, um, pushed back to earlier this week. I think the president showed some real leadership. Well, anyway, whatever. Every senator who opposed the repeal effort worries about being blamed for failing to act. A recent Gallup poll said 70%, and this is very important here, of the GOP respondents said they support repeal and replace. Conservative activists, already aggressively targeting centrist Republicans, but it's really not going to matter. They have repeal traitors attack. This is Lisa Murkowski, Ron Portman of Ohio, and Shirley Moore Capito. Shirley Moore Capito has been around a long time. Archmore was her father there in West Virginia. She is safe. Attacks upon her are not going anyplace. Lisa Murkowski out in Alaska will be a very long time before she runs for re-election. I mean, she was just re-elected. So in other words, as the former mayor of Chicago, Mayor Daley said, they'll get over it. So this whole thing here, and then you got Lee and Moran of Kansas who decided no vote effectively killed at the luncheon. He's scolding. Well, that doesn't really matter. DJ Trump, with very low poll ratings of his own, is not able to carry very much water as he would have, say, the first month. And even in the first month, his problem has been he's not really gotten much in terms of approval beyond his base. Even on Inauguration Day, he said, "I'm ready to act." Well, the whole thing, he could be ready to act, but the rest of Congress is not. And when they see 32 million or 36 million or whatever it is, 32 million more uninsured in 10 years, that in itself sends a jolt there, no doubt about it. Nonetheless, this will do it for us on the 20th of July, 2017. The score from the CBC on the repeal of the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare Repeal Reconciliation Act is what they officially called it, 2017, has got its problems in Medicaid expansion. The basic problem that they have is many of these states, Ohio, the Appalachian part of it, West Virginia, etc., a lot of people that qualify for Medicaid, a lot of poor people there, a lot of sick people. It's something they really can't pass up. In many of the red states, at least the ones that have done Medicare expansion, there's problems there also. So, in other words, you have a situation where states like Heller in Nevada, he's in trouble, and if for some reason Senator McCain does not survive and it doesn't look very good for him, uh, eventually there will be another election there in Arizona. There's already one seat in jeopardy in Arizona. Those seats could flip over. So, in other words, McConnell is betting now on Missouri. Well, I wouldn't bet on anything because part of the problem is that we look back at these various states, Missouri, I should say in Kansas and in Georgia and in Montana, states that Trump handily carried was shaved down to single digits. And in Kansas, if they'd had more money, they could have possibly pulled that one out. In Georgia, it was a very close race there with Mr. Ossoff. And even in South Carolina, very little money was put in there, but it was turned out to be a very close race there. So when you see these close races in some of these traditional red states, you see that there is a time that things are changing. Let me just do real clear politics here quickly because we have a little bit of time. I was going to actually wrap this up, but we will wrap it up. And we'll go to, I believe, a different presentation on some other channels in a minute here. My voice holds up, which I think it will. But we'll look at the polling here. A lot of polling out on Wednesday. Fox News had DJ Trump at 41 approval. And what is it? It's 12 point, was it 12 point difference there? Yeah, 53 disapproval. Gallup at 37. Rasmussen is highest one at 42. Reuters at 38. And YouGov at 39. And let me see. The ABC Washington Post. This is, generic vote for Congress. Had the Democrats up by 14. I wouldn't pay that much attention this early on that. YouGov had the Democrats up by 6. The generic ballot is what they call this. Direction of the country, basically right direction at 31. That was at YouGov. 26 at Reuters. The wrong track at 58 and 59 respectively. So this is where our polling was. And let's see, PPP, that would have been on Tuesday, had DJ Trump at 41 there. And congressional, we don't pay much attention to them because they really hadn't had much. Bloomberg had DJ Trump at 40, I suppose, yeah. And 56 disapproval there. So that was back to Monday. And the Post on Sunday at 39. So in other words, he's in the high 30s, low 40s. Not something to write home about. And then you have the generic congressional ballot here. Democrats being ahead in one, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, by 14, the other by 6. Doesn't matter that much, but they are ahead at this time. But the problem is the Republicans look at this and they say, what if? Now, if they pass the Affordable Care Act, there's more, repeal the Affordable Care Act, there is more problems for them, no doubt about that. This will finally do it for us. It's about 14 in the morning. We'll talk to you soon. Have a good day.